The highest temperatures of the Dust Bowl were mostly in 1934. July 24th, Milwaukee was 105 degrees. Chicago was 105 degrees. St. Louis was 110 degrees. Tulsa was 111. But also, you have this ongoing, this is years and years of drought that doesn't break until 1939. Keep in mind that the Dust Bowl is a matter of two things intersecting. One is that there are regularly these kind of drought seasons that last more than 1 year. And the Great Plains regions had had relatively good weather all through the late 1800s. They hadn't had these massive droughts that sometimes hit, being used, had torn away everything holding that topsoil down. So when everything dried out, all you had was a layer of dust, and these giant Midwest Great Plains sort of storms would come through, and everything would get whipped up. Roosevelt's administration was trying to do things to fix this, but you can't make rain appear. And part of the solution was what they called these shelter belts. Shelter belts were a tree growing operation. This was one of Roosevelt's babies. A series of these shelter belts were put around proper grazing areas, kind of understanding the flow of the land. It doesn't stop the drought, it doesn't stop the heat waves, but it does stop the topsoil erosion part of that to a significant degree. For better and for worse, it turns out that we now have some solutions to some of that you can't stop the drought. So we have these giant aquifers that are being used and irrigating all of the land where things are being grown across the Great Plains. But those irrigation techniques do require you to cut down the trees to irrigate properly because it's this giant metal arm that circulates. And so you have to cut down the trees along the edges for the arm to circulate. And then later they got this kind of drop arm that can do the corners. So then you're motivated to cut down all of the trees that Roosevelt's crew planted to make sure that you can get kind of maximum return on this property. So a lot of those 220 million trees that were planted in these shelter belts have been cut down because there's such a pressure to get maximum yield from this land. And irrigation allows you to withstand 1 year or 2 year drought. But the shelter belt was what was going to allow to withstand multi-year drought. And so now they're back in a kind of precarious position in places where to allow for average year irrigation, they've actually cut down the thing that's going to stop the decade-long drought from decimating that property. And it turns out that those shelter belts not only change the wind flow patterns, but they also impact the microclimate in all these other ways. And I don't want to make it sound like every farmer that's cutting down these trees is doing it without thinking about this long-term outcome. Lots of farmers are replanting the trees. Any way you look at it, 220 million trees is a huge social works project.